Blessed Lord, as we explore the life of your servant, Prof. Charles Hodge, we thank you for his writings, labors, and witness. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. We turn our attention now to this volume, which I did not know existed. Charles Hodge, A Life. This would be by his son, Alexander Archibald Hodge. Published in 1880. That would be 6 years after his death. Preface. The family of the late Dr. Charles Hodge has been assured by those whose judgment they have the most reason to confide that a memoir of his life should be prepared. This was rendered probable by the fact that although his life had been a quiet one, varied by few external events of general interest, yet he had been one of very remarkable literary activity and of protracted and extended influence, involving an intimate association with many of the most interesting characters and events of his time. The totality of the phenomenon, including personality and achievement, was unquestionably very remarkable. It matters not whether the effect is to be attributed in the largest measure to natural, gracious, and providential endowments. The study of the causes combining to produce such an effect must be instructive. Behind every cause, whatever its nature, is the beneficence, efficiency of God, and to him will be all the praise. The subscriber undertook the book because he could secure the agency of none of those who would be more competent. That he is a son is of advantage, insofar as the relation secures special opportunities of information and the strongest motives to diligence. It need not, on the other hand, occasion no embarrassment, as he does not purpose to intrude upon others his opinions of it or his affection for his father, but simply to gather and present materials through which his father and his work may speak for themselves, and the opinions of the most competent among his contemporaries may be impartially reflected. At the repeated and earnest solicitation of his children, my father jotted down during the last year of his life some reminiscence of his childhood and youth and of his early friends. These I have recorded in the first and second chapters of this memoir, preserving his order and language in the first person, but interpolating additional matter of the same kind, culled from the reminiscence of my father's own brother, the date Dr. Hugh L. Hodge of Philadelphia, dictated to his daughter-in-law, Mrs. Harriet Woolsey Hodge, during the winters of 70 and 71. I have preferred rather to fuse the new material with that of my father, and to keep them mechanically distinct, and have marked the words of my uncle as his only in a few instances, when the propriety of doing so will be evident. The other sources from which these memorials are drawn: a diary kept during his residence in Germany from March 1827 to May 1828, Meager notices of events and dates preserved in connection with his daily record of the weather, his published writings and extant manuscripts, his own letters preserved by his mother, brother, and friends, the letters of his correspondents, estimates of his character and services, published during his life and since his decease, and especially the printed records of his semi-centennial celebration, April 24, 1872. The state of his letters and papers is accurately represented by what is said to an application from a daughter of one of his oldest friends. Through my long life, I have never destroyed and never preserved letters. With much care, many interesting relics have been recovered from the Mass, while doubtless much just as valuable remains undiscovered. I am particularly indebted to my father's pupils in Ireland and Scotland, Professor Robert Watts of Belfast and Mr. Charles Salmon of Aberfoyle, and to Reverend Benjamin B. Warfield and the Reverend Doctors Boardman and William Paxton of America. Princeton, New Jersey, August 19, 1880. A. Hodge. Chapter 1, Autobiography, with an extract of the reminiscences of his brother. Chapter 2, Autobiography, continued from his entering the College of New Jersey, September 1812, to his graduation, September 1815. 3, from his graduation from the college, 1815, to his graduation from the Theological Seminary, 1819. 4, from his graduation from seminary, 1819, to his election as professor, 1822. 5, from his election as professor, 1822, to his departure for Europe, 1826. Chapter 6, from his departure for Europe, 1826, to his return to Princeton, 1828. 7, from his return to home and work in Princeton, 1828, to his transfer to the chair of systematic theology, 1840. Chapter 8, Disruption of the Presbyterian Church, 1834 to 1838. Chapter 9, from his change of professorship, 1840, to the death of Dr. Archibald Alexander, 1851. 10, from the death of Dr. Archibald Alexander, 1851, to the commencement of the Civil War, 1861. 11, from 1861 and the commencement of the Civil War to 1872 and the celebration of Dr. Hodge's semi-centennial. 12, his semi-centennial, 1872. 13, his last years, from 1874 to his death, 1878. 14, the last days. 15, Dr. Hodge considered as a teacher, preacher, theologian, and Christian man. Contributions by the Reverend Doctors Benjamin Warfield, William Paxton, and Henry Boardman. General estimate of Dr. Hodge's systematic theology by Prof. There's also some other things here that may be of interest. Charles Hodge, A Life. Chapter 1, Autobiography, with extracts from the reminiscences of his brother. ancestry, childhood, mother, brother, teachers, and companions. During the last years of the 7th and first of the 18th centuries, William Hodge and Margaret, his wife, lived in the north of Ireland. They were parents of 4 boys and 2 girls, of whom 2 died in early childhood, and 1 surviving to maturity left no record. The father died January 4, 1723, and the mother 1730. Soon after the death of their mother, the 3 remaining children, William, Andrew, and Hugh, emigrated to America and settled in Philadelphia, where they became successful merchants and men of influence in the community. William had but 1 child, Mary, who in August 1757 married Mr. William West, from whom are descended the Wests, Codyhams and Frasers of Philadelphia, and the Stewarts of Baltimore. Hugh, the youngest of the 3 brothers, had but 1 child, the son bearing his own name, who graduated in the College of New Jersey in Princeton, 1773, and took his master's degree in course. Soon afterwards, he sailed for Europe, but the ship he sailed in was never heard of after leaving port. His mother, Mrs. Hannah Hodge, known for many years in the family as Aunt Hannah, was recognized in all the city as the mother in Israel. She was born in Philadelphia, January 1721, the daughter of John Harcum of English descent. Her mother, whose maiden name was Dawes, was the child of a Protestant who fled from France on account of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, 1685, and afterwards, with other French Protestants, was principally instrumental in founding the First Presbyterian Church and standing on Market above Second, of which Jedediah Andrews was pastor. Although Hannah joined the church in 1736 or 7, she thought her true conversion occurred under the preaching of Whitefield, and her life became eminently consecrated to religious interests. When in 1743 the Second Presbyterian was formed out of the converts of Whitefield, she was one of 160 communicants originally enrolled. In 1745, she married Mr. Hugh Hodge, who was a deacon in the Second Church from the foundation to the time of his death. They had a dry goods store on the north side of Market Street above Second. The house was the resort of clergymen and the center of religious meetings. After her husband's death, Mrs. Hodge, although left independent, retained the business in order that she might not curtail her charities. Dr. Ashbel Green, her pastor, afterwards the president of Princeton College, entertained a sincere reverence for her and concludes his memoir of her, printed in the Panoplus, Volume 2, for the year ending June 1807, with the glowing eulogy of his friend. Solid sense, sterling integrity, sincere piety united with great humility, the love of truth, and the abhorrence of hypocrisy were her chief characteristics. These gave her an influence among her Christian associates, perhaps superior to that of any other individual. Her house was the home of several old and infirm ladies, supported in great measure by her bounty, and here also originated weekly meeting for prayer and religious instruction observed still in the second church and in most of the other Presbyterian churches of the city. The house in which she lived by the will of her husband, left upon her decease to the trustees of the College of New Jersey for the education of candidates for the ministry. The endowment has continued to fulfill the pious design of its founders up to the present time, yielding an income varying from $800 to $1,500 annually, thus constituting, with few others, the foundation of a system of endowments which has since attained magnificent proportions. Hannah died on December 17, 1805, when I was 8 years old. I was present at her funeral and was standing with my cousin, John Bayard, rather older than myself, near the open coffin. We began to cry. We thought that was the right thing to do. And his mother came up and, giving us a little shake, said in authoritative whisper, "Stop." The discovery that we were making ourselves ridiculous instantly dried the fountain of tears. By such filaments, the present generation is connected with the past. Andrew Hodge, the second in order of age of the three immigrant brothers, was born in Ireland, March 28, 1711, was my grandfather. He soon became a successful merchant and acquired considerable property. His wharf and store and citizen residence, in which he spent his life, were on Water Street, to the south of what is now termed Delaware Avenue. His country seat was on Mead Lane, now Montgomery Avenue, and he possessed one of the only 6 carriages then in the city. He was active and influential in all the affairs of the church and community, one of the founders of and liberal contributor to the second church, and a member of the board of trustees to the day of his death. In 1739, he married Miss Jane McCulloch. Her brother Hugh was an elder in second church and a man of great goodness and influence, both remarkable for the great tenacity with which he held to his opinions. He never would consent to the assertion that the earth moves, maintaining that it was contrary alike to his own observation and to biblical authority, as Joshua commanded not the earth, but the sun to stand still. This character is said to have been imbibed by our family. Oh, there is Uncle McCulloch, having become quite a saying among the descendants of his sister. The religious excitement which attended the preaching of Whitefield in this country about the middle of the last century gave rise to 2 parties in the Presbyterian Church. Those who approved of the revival were called New Lights, and those who stood aloof or opposed it were called the Old Lights. The pastor of the First Church, then the only Presbyterian church in Philadelphia, together with a majority of the congregation, were Old Lights, while a minority were on the other side. These latter were, at their own request, set off and organized into the second church, of which the celebrated Gilbert Tennant was the first pastor. Of this, Andrew Hodge, Sr. was trustee, and his son-in-law, Colonel John Bayard, and his brother-in-law, Mr. Hugh McCulloch, were ruling elders. The church edifice was erected on the corner of 3rd and Arch Streets. It was an oblong building. The shorter side on the east faced 3rd Street. The longer side was on Arch Street. The steeple was on the west end, and the pulpit was on the north side. Subsequently, the steeple was taken down and the tower included in the auditorium. and the pews were turned round to face the pulpit, which was placed at the west end. The church in after years was removed to 7th Street near Arch, where it remained during the pastorates of Reverend Doctors Cuyler and Shield. A shifting of the population necessitating another removal. A lot was purchased at the corner of 21st and Walnut, on which had been erected one of the most beautiful church buildings in the city. My grandfather's pew in the original edifice on 3rd and Arch Streets was one in the middle aisle to the left of the preacher. The same pew, for example, the same in relative position, has remained in the family ever since. It is now held by the great-grandson of the original occupant, Dr. H. Lennox Hodge, who is also a ruling elder in his ancestral church. The family details are of interest to those whom they concern. I wish, however, that those who come after me should know that their ancestors and kindred were Presbyterians and patriots. Andrew Hodge and Jane McCullough were the parents of 15 children, 8 of whom died in infancy or early life. Their eldest child, Margaret, married John Rubenheim Bayard of Bohemia Manor, Maryland, afterwards colonel in the Revolutionary Army. After the war, he settled in Philadelphia, but during the latter part of his life resided in New Brunswick, New Jersey. His sons were James A., who married the daughter of Reverend Dr. Rogers, New York; Andrew, a merchant and president of the Commercial Bank, Philadelphia; Samuel, clerk of the Supreme Court of the United States and a resident of Princeton, New Jersey; John M., who resided on the Millstone River, near to the village of the same name; and Nicholas, a physician, who settled in Savannah, Georgia. His daughters were Jane, who married Chief Justice Kirkpatrick, again, the second child of Andrew Hodge Sr., married James Ashton, a twin brother of her brother-in-law, Colonel Maynard, who was surgeon in the Revolutionary Army and was killed in Charleston, South Carolina. Her children were John Baynard, who lived in Cumberland and died unmarried; Jane, whom I remember as a portly lady, dressed in the simple habit of a Quakeress, which the stricter Methodists of that period adopted; and James Baynard, born 1767. He practiced law in Wilmington, Delaware, and in 1787 represented his district in the National House of Representatives. In 1804, he was chosen United States Senator as successor to his father-in-law, Governor Bassett, whose position he retained until he was selected by President Madison as a commissioner, together with Gallup and Clay and others, to negotiate a peace with Great Britain. His son, Richard Baynard, United States Senator from 1836 to 39, and again from 1801 to 1845. A third daughter of Andrew Hodge Sr. married a gentleman from West Indies by the name of Phillips. She left an only child, a daughter, who died unmarried. A fourth daughter married Major Hodgson, a commissary in the Revolutionary Army. She lived to a great age and left many children. The sons of Andrew Hodge Sr. were John, a physician, who died at 23 years of age, and William, a merchant, who, residing abroad, was called by acquaintances on the continent the handsome American. After the Revolution, he was employed in the Secret Service of his government. and falling under suspicion was for a time confined in the Bastille, where he was well treated. He died when only 30 years old. Of James, the youngest son of Andrew Sr., it is only known that he died unmarried. Graduated in Princeton College in the class of 1772 and married Anne Ledyard, half-sister of the traveler and author. He was a captain in the Pennsylvania line during the Revolution. He was present at the Princeton battle and used to boast that he captured a cannon in Stockton's Wood. He lived to a great age and left many children. I heard the old gentleman say that at the Battle of Princeton, a company from Delaware formed a little in advance of his own, broke and ran at the first fire of the British. Its captain, who was rather corpulent, came puffing by crying, "Run, Captain Hodge, run, Captain Hodge, we shall all be killed." The only answer I could get to the question, "Did Captain Hodge run?" was a little laugh. He fell back, however, upon his treasure trove, the cannon in Stockton's woods. Hugh, the eighth child and fourth son of Andrew Hodge Sr., was my father. He was born in Philadelphia, August 1755, graduated in the College of New Jersey in 1773, and studied medicine under the eminent Dr. Caldwalder. He was appointed surgeon February 1776, and the 3rd Battalion of troops raised in the province of Pennsylvania in the service of the United Colonies. He was captured by the British and held as a prisoner at Fort Washington, New York. But through the intervention of General Washington, was liberated on parole. After engaging in mercantile pursuits with his brother Andrew, he returned to the practice of medicine and soon secured an influential connection. The tradition of his fine person and attractive manners lingered among the latest survivors of his generation. He was a prominent actor in the terrible scenes occasioned by the memorable epidemics of yellow fever in 1793 and afterwards 1795. And through the exposure incident to his labors on these occasions, his constitution was impaired, and he died after protracted sufferings in July 1798 at the early age of 43. His pastor, Dr. Ashbel Green, said of him in his eulogy that as a husband, father, brother, friend, and citizen, none surpassed him. His wife, my mother, was Mary Blanchard of Boston. Her mother's name was Hunt, probably of English origin. Her father, Joseph Blanchard, was a descendant of French Huguenots. She was born in Boston in 1765 and passed her earliest years amidst the excitements preparatory to the rebellion of the colonies against the authority of Great Britain. Of course, her opportunities for education were comparatively few, but such as they were, she employed them well and early manifested a great taste for reading, often retiring from the fireside circle to a cold room in the depth of Boston winter, and there, enveloped in a blanket, read and committed to memory passages from Pope Van Dryden, which she could repeat in afterlife. The physician of her family was the celebrated Joseph Warren, after Major General Warren, who fell at Bunker Hill, one of the first of his country's martyrs. Her recollections of him were always vivid, as she often sat on his lap listening to his enthusiastic discourse on the exciting controversies of the day. She was the youngest of several children. The descendants of some of her brothers remain in Boston to the present time, while those of others are in the extreme Southwest. Her brother Samuel married a niece of Honorable Thomas Pickering, a colonel in the Revolutionary Army, and afterward was Secretary of War under Washington. Her favorite nephew, Francis Blanchard, was father of the first wife of the distinguished Mr. Winthrop of Boston. Her parents died when she was young, and her brothers and sisters, being for the most part married, she came to Philadelphia to reside with her brother, John Blanchard, about 1785, at 20 years of age, and was introduced to our family through letters to Major Hodge. After a courtship protracted by the failure of his mercantile enterprises, she was married to my father in 1790 by Reverend Dr. Green, and went to housekeeping in the dwelling house on the west of the storehouse on Water Street below Race, belonging to the estate of his father, Andrew Hodge Sr., then recently deceased. On December 19th, their first child was born, a daughter whom they named Elizabeth. She was a healthy and promising child until August 1793. She was suddenly carried off by the yellow fever. The second child was Mary, born September 1, 1792, and their third child was a little boy named Hugh, born 1794. When her little boy was about a year old, after many years of absence, my mother revisited her home in Boston, leaving her little ones in Philadelphia. Very shortly, the little Mary sickened with measles, which of course the mother was instantly informed. She immediately left Boston in the mail stage, and after traveling 3 days and 3 nights, she arrived home to find that Mary was dead and Hugh was dying of the same disease. Thus she was left childless again. Their fourth child, Hugh Lennox Hodge, was born in 1796, the year after the death of his little namesake brother. The family at this time, because of the supposed insalubrity of Water Street, were moved to a house on the south side of Arch Street above 4th, the third door from Christ Church burying ground. Here at midnight, in the last moments of 28 December 1797, I, the fifth and last child, was born. Aunt Hannah used to inquire for that strange name child, Charles, as it was a new name in the family. My father died the 14th of July the next year, leaving my mother a widow in very limited circumstances, with 2 infants, respectively 2 years and 6 months of age. It is no marvel that mothers are sacred in the eyes of their children. The debt they owe to them is beyond all estimate. To our mother, my brother, and myself, under God, owe absolutely everything. To us she devoted her life. For us she prayed, labored, and suffered. My grandfather's property yielded her for some years a comfortable income, as it consisted principally of Water Street Wharf with its docks and warehouse and dwellings on 3 sides. It was surrounded, its proceeds depended on the state of commerce. As the Non-Intercourse Act and embargo which preceded the War of 1812 and the war itself led to the suspension of commercial business. Our mother's income was almost entirely cut off. This was at the time as we were preparing for college. Instead of putting her children off her hands and leaving them to provide for themselves by sacrificing all she had, by the most self-denying economy, and by keeping borders, she succeeded in securing for them the benefits of a collegiate and professional education. She lived long enough to see both her sons settled in life and heads of families. It is a tradition in the family that her youth she was distinguished for personal beauty. A gentleman from Boston, after age and illness had produced their inevitable effects, exclaimed, "Can that be the beautiful Mary Blanchard of Boston?" In the eyes of her children, she continued beautiful to the end. Her large blue eyes never lost the light of intelligence and love. Although thus devoted to the support and education of her children, she was always active in promoting the welfare of others. Her son Hugh has recorded his recollection of trudging by her side through the snow many squares to assist with other ladies in the distribution of soup and groceries to the destitute, either as donations or wholesale prices. She was one of the founders, and to the time of her death, an active promoter and directress of the Family Association for the Relief of Widows and Single Women of Reduced Circumstances, which still continues after 80 years, one of the most useful, as it was one of the earliest of many benevolent institutions of Philadelphia. Having been an invalid for several years, early in 1832, she took a slight cold, which did not seem to be of any importance for 2 or 3 days. But this was unexpectedly followed by pulmonary congestion and slight delirium, so that she expired on the 14th of that month. Too soon, alas, for me to see her alive, though I left Princeton in response to the first note of alarm. Her funeral services were conducted by her aged pastor, Dr. Ashbel Green, who had married her, baptized her children, and delivered a eulogy over the grave of her husband. My brother was far more than a brother to me. Although only 18 months my senior, he assumed from the first the office of guardian. He always went first in the dark. I never slept out of his arms until I was 11 or 12 years old. I have now 1877, distinctly before my mind the room in which the crisis in my life occurred. I recollect how quickly, after blowing out the candle, I jumped into bed and threw the cover over my head. Having lived through that night, I afterwards got on very well. No professor in Princeton was ever able to bring up and educate a family of children on his salary. My brother, without waiting to be asked, always helped me, though. He seemed to regard me as himself and my children as his own. Although he rose to eminence as a practitioner and professor of medicine, he was revered principally for his goodness. His lifelong friend, Dr. Casper Morse, said in a published letter that he regarded Dr. Hugh Hodge as the best man he'd ever known. He left 5 sons, 3 of whom are ministers in the Presbyterian Church. 1 is a minister in the Episcopal Church, and the 5th is a Presbyterian ruling elder. This is due, I firmly believe, to their father's prayer and to the influence of their excellent mother, a daughter of the late John Aspinwall of New York. The first school to which I went was taught by an old lady in Arch Street. It was attended by a room full of little boys and girls. I afterwards went to a school in Fifth Street, opposite Independence Square, taught by Andrew Brown, a worthy elder of Second Presbyterian Church. His specialties were writing and arithmetic. He was adept in making quill pens and an expert in the use of them. His flourishes were wonderful. He must also have been a good teacher of arithmetic. At least I knew more of arithmetic then than I do now. Within a few months, a thin folio copy book having my name written in it and dated 1807 was found among some old papers. The book is filled with solutions of questions in barter, profit, and loss, many of which would puzzle me now to solve them. My next school was taught by an Irish gentleman named Taylor. He was a Swedenborgian. He lived in perpetual sunshine, always happy and always amiable. He took little interest in drilling his pupils in reading, writing, and arithmetic. His favorite method of teaching was to get half a dozen boys around him before a large wall map of England, France, Italy, or some other country, pointing out its rivers, mountains, cities, and ancient ruins, descanting on the elements of the population, the manner and customs of its people, its productions, its great men, mixing up geography, antiquity, history, and statistics. He would linger around the battlefields, describe the conflicts, taking part vehemently with one side against the other. He was an enthusiast and infected his pupils with his spirit. He used to flatter, dubbing them with the names and ranks of his heroes. My associates in this school have, as far as I know, all passed away. There were two Ralstons, two McCalls, two Reeds, James Hopkins, John Britton, and others with whom the elder brother Hugh says, Charles, as his manner was, through his whole life, contacted intimate friendships. These now are all gone. During my early boyhood in Philadelphia, my brother and myself went to a drawing school kept in a room over Woodward's bookstore on the corner of Chestnut and Third Streets. His master was an Englishman named Cox. He was a character. He lived in the southern part of the city by himself in a house filled with garret to cellar with books and odds and ends of all things curious. While under his instruction, I executed a landscape in watercolors, which now hangs in my study, which is considered to possess considerable merit. How the merit got there is the mystery. Those who know anything of the history of my one work of art are aware that when painting in India ink, the teacher looked over my shoulder and said, Charles, I think I could spit paint it better than that. They therefore find it hard to believe that the merit of my landscape is due to native talent on my part and not to the intervention of my teaching. Our early training was religious. Our mother was a Christian. She took us regularly to church and carefully drilled us in the Westminster Catechism, which we recited on stated occasions to Dr. Ashbel Green, our pastor. There has never been anything remarkable in my religious experience, unless it be that it began very early. I think that in my childhood I came nearer to conforming to the Apostles' injunction, pray without ceasing, than in any other period of my life. As far back as I can remember, I had the habit of thanking God for everything I received and asking Him for everything I wanted. If I lost a book or any of my playthings, I prayed that I might find it. I prayed walking along the streets, in school and out of school, whether playing or studying. I did not do this in obedience to any prescribed rule. It seemed natural. I thought of God as everywhere present being, full of kindness and love. He would not be offended if children talked to him. I knew he cared for sparrows. I was as cheerful and happy as the birds, and acted as they did. There was little more in my prayers and praises than in worship rendered by the fowls of the air. The mild form of natural religion did not amount to much. It, however, saved me from profanity. I cannot recollect that I ever uttered a profane word except once. It was when I was 13 or 14 years old. I was walking with my brother and struck my foot against a stone and said, "Damn it." My brother was shocked and exclaimed, "Why, Charles?" I cannot tell why I said that. I was neither hurt nor angry. It seemed to me to be an effect without cause. I felt like very, very small Paul when he said, "It was not I who did it, but something dwelling in me." I am thankful that no similar experience has ever since occurred. In the early part of the year 1810, my brother and myself were sent to the Classical Academy in Somerville, New Jersey. The village was on high ground, very healthy, and on the line of swift and sure mail coach line between Philadelphia and New York, near the confluence of the Millstone and Raritan rivers, between 10 and 12 miles west of New Brunswick. The reason for my mother's preference for the school was not its celebrity, but its situation only. A few miles from the residence of Mr. John Maynard, who, although only our first cousin, was old enough to exercise past parental control over us. For the 6 months we boarded in the family of Mr. afterwards Judge Vanderveen. His oldest daughter was then an infant, a few months old. I sometimes was allowed to carry her about on a pillow. After leaving Somerville, I did not see her until after the interval of 50 years. She was then a tall, thin lady, the widow of the Honorable William Dayton, U.S. Senator and Minister to France. I could hardly believe my eyes. I had another experience of the same kind. During my school days at Somerville, the reigning belle of that region was Miss Martina Elmdorf. We boys used to collect around the church door to see her in and out of her carriage. She subsequently married the Honorable Dr. Condict of Morristown. Some 40 years after leaving Somerville, I dined at Dr. Condict's and said to him that I had known his wife when a young lady. I should be very glad to be presented to her. He replied that she was very much of an invalid and never left her room, but after dinner he would introduce me. Her room was on the ground floor when the door was opened. A tall, emaciated, mild, and courteous lady, evidently not long for this world, rose before me. I could not help thinking that if identity could be preserved in spite of all the change that was outward, it might well be preserved between that aged believer and what she would then be when she rose resplendent in the image of her Savior. During the remaining 18 months of my stay in Somerville, I lived in the family of Dr. Stryker. The beautiful country about Somerville was in great measure occupied by wealthy and refined Dutch families. The Almendorfs, von Wachters, von Esses, Freilichhuesens, and many others. Mr. John Freiling Hughes lived on the Raritan, a few miles up the river. His brother Frederick lived in the village of Millstone. He was the father of the present U.S. Senator, the Honor F.T. Freiling Hughes. A third brother, the Honorable Theodore Freiling Hughes, so long an ornament of New Jersey, and General Stryker had married sisters. This led to his frequent visiting the family in which I lived. I thus became acquainted with him in my boyhood, an acquaintance which in afterlife ripened on my part into a revering friendship. I was one of those who was allowed to stand around his coffin and gaze on his saintly countenance in the repose of death. His pronounced evangelical sentiments militated against his political success. The late Governor Stewart was on intimate terms with Archbishop Hughes of New York and called on him with requests that he would use his influence with the Romanists to induce them to vote the Whig ticket when Clay and Hughes were candidates for the president and vice president, respectively. The Archbishop shook his hand and said, "We could stand Mr. Clay, but we cannot stand Freiling Hughes." This was told by me, a distinguished gentleman from New York. My informant was satisfied of the truth of the anecdote. Mr. Clay was also a praying man. The late Dr. Edgar of Nashville, Tennessee, told me that when traveling through Kentucky, he spent a night with Mr. Clay at the house of a mutual friend. It was cholera season. During the night, Mr. Clay was taken alarmingly ill. Dr. Edgar was one of his attendants. In course of conversation, Mr. Clay, after expressing his faith, never had introduced a measure to Congress without first kneeling down and invoking the guidance and blessing of God. I began the study of Latin when I went to Somerville. During the first year, the academy was taught by the Reverend Mr. Boyer, afterward pastor in the Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Pennsylvania. When I went away, the school was under the care of Mr. Vredenburg, pastor of the Dutch Reformed in the village. On one occasion, the pulpit was filled by Reverend Dr. Livingston, the long patriarch of the Reformed Dutch Church in America. He was a patrician as well as patriarch, tall and elegant in person, careful in his dress, a model of courtesy and manners, hair perfectly white and reaching down to his shoulders. I could not believe that Abraham was more venerable in his appearance. The only thing I recollect of his sermon is that he exhorted the people to commit to memory the 15th chapter of the first epistle to Corinthians. The exhortation took effect, for a few days after I heard Mr. Stryker call upon his daughters to repeat the chapter, the doctor prompting and helping them through. One summer, Dr. Livingston invited Dr. Archibald Alexander to take a seat with him in his carriage for a few days' tour through New Jersey to attend Bible Society meetings. Dr. Alexander told me that Dr. Livingston addressed everyone he had the opportunity to speak to on the subject of religion. Even the hostler who came out to water the horses was sure to receive some word of admonition or counsel. This is a gift which Dr. Alexander appreciated, but did not possess. During the 6 weeks journey I made with him through Virginia in 1816, I never except once heard him make such a personal address to anyone. The exception did not amount to much. The stage had stopped for a few moments in Charleston in the valley, and the driver standing by the pump called out to a companion whom he saw going towards an open church. "Take care, don't go there, you may get converted." Dr. Alexander said to him, "Do you think that would hurt him?" And Dr. Alexander, in the opinion of all who knew him, was second to no one in piety and zeal. The only one of my school classmates at Somerville with whom I was associated in afterlife was Reverend Peter Studiford. During his whole ministerial life, he was the pastor of Presbyterian Church in Lambertville, New Jersey. The church rose up under his care from a mere handful to being one of the largest in the Senate. Dr. Studiford was distinguished for learning, wisdom, and goodness in the most comprehensive sense of the term. In the early part of the year 1812, my brother and myself were moved to Princeton. In order to make a home for us, her mother had removed from Philadelphia and rented a small frame house in Witherspoon Street, which runs directly north, starting from the college. The house is still standing next to the old session house since the parochial school. In order to aid in meeting her expenses, mother received into her family as boarders several boys preparing for college, all of whom were either relations or connections. Our cousin Alexander Hodge of Philadelphia, Nicholas Bayard, son of our cousin, Dr. Nicholas Bayard of Savannah, Georgia, and two young Master Ward stepsons of Dr. Bayard through his second marriage. These young men were the half-brothers of Jane and Margaret Bayard, the former of whom married Dr. Leighton Wilson and spent 17 years as a missionary with her distinguished husband in Western Africa. After that protracted service, she returned to country in as perfect health as any of her contemporaries who remained at home. A year or two after her return, she said to me that she hankered after Africa. Her sister Margaret married the Reverend Dr. Eckert and went with him as a missionary to Ceylon and remained there 10 years until her broken heart compelled their return. There was no resident physician at their station, and as cholera prevailed among the natives, Dr. Eckert told me he always kept on hand a bottle containing a mixture of calomel and opium, and when called to a sufferer, universally administered a teaspoon of the combined powder. If rejected, he repeated the dose. If retained, a cure almost followed. My brother entered the college in May 1812, sophomore half advanced. I entered the academy then taught by Mr. Reverend Tyler, who was afterwards head of the prosperous classical school in Trenton. The Princeton Academy then stood between the church and the house of the president of the college. It was during the same season that Princeton Seminary was founded, and Dr. Archibald Alexander was inaugurated as its first professor. That important service was performed in the old Presbyterian Church, which is occupied on the site of the present First Church. I can well remember then, as a boy of 14, lying at length on the rail of the gallery, listening to the doctor's inaugural address and watching the ceremony of investiture. One day during the same summer, the school dorm was opened. Dr. Alexander walked in. He found me stammering over a verse in the Greek Testament. The process seemed to amuse the old gentleman, just 40, old to a boy. He asked me what pistis was derived from. I could not tell him. Mr. Philo apologized for me by saying that I had been studying Greek only a month or 6 weeks. This occurrence was the first thread of the cord which bound me to Dr. Alexander, the cord never broken. He never failed to notice me when I crossed his path. Frequently, he would take me with him in his gig when he was out into the country to preach. On one occasion, he took me to Flemington, a port 15 or 16 miles north of Princeton. I was astonished at the knowledge he displayed of the country through which we passed. He knew the character of the soil in every neighborhood, character of the people, whether Dutch or of English origin, the name of all the streams, where they rose and where they were emptied. We were hospitably entertained from Saturday to Monday in the house of Mr. Samuel Southard, then a rising young lawyer, afterwards United States Senator and Secretary of the Navy. In my young days, he and the Honorable Theodore Frelinghuysen were the two most popular men in New Jersey. Mr. Southard was a handsome man and very cordial in his manners. He had the happy tact of making every man he met make him feel he was glad to see him and really enjoyed his society. And he liked everybody, and everybody liked him. Some years afterwards, in 1825, during a meeting of the trustees of the College of New Jersey, Chief Justice Kirkpatrick was staying with me, and Mr. Southard, then Secretary of the Navy, called to see him and gave him a glowing account of the rapidity with which he fitted out the frigate Brandywine to take General Lafayette back to Europe. When he finished, the Chief Justice turned to me and said, "Now, Mr. Southard, if any man should ask you which end of the ship goes first, could you tell him?" This was hardly fair in the old judge, as it was not expected that a Secretary of the Navy should be an expert in naval architecture. And next time we'll pick up autobiography, continued from his entering the College of New Jersey 1812 to his graduation in 1815. Blessed Lord, we thank you for the witness of this great man, Charles Hodge. That we be inspired anew and afresh by his continuing witness, even at our times in 2025. Blessed be your name, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.